towering with 4 arms and scales that shifted from deep purple to angry red when agitated, stood at attention before the assembled cadets. His reputation preceded him like a dark storm cloud. No instructor in the Academy's 3-century history had washed out more students or reduced more promising warriors to sobbing wrecks. The hall itself was a monument to intimidation. Weapon racks lined the walls, displaying energy rifles, plasma cannons, and melee weapons from dozens of worlds. Training dummies bore the scars of countless practice sessions, their synthetic flesh marked with burns, cuts, and blast craters. Holographic displays showed tactical scenarios playing on loop, battles from the last Great War where entire fleets had been reduced to space debris in minutes. 4 yellow eyes swept across the new arrivals with practiced disdain. There were soldiers, their chitinous armor gleaming under the harsh lights. A group of crystalline clustered together, their translucent bodies refracting the room's illumination into rainbow patterns. Several massive warriors stood at the back, their rock-like skin already from childhood combat rituals. And then there was the human. She sat in the 3rd row, perfectly still while chaos swirled around her. Other cadets whispered nervously, checked their equipment obsessively, or tried to look more intimidating than their neighbors. The human girl simply waited, her dark eyes fixed straight ahead with an intensity that made pause mid-stride. "Pathetic," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally killed more enemies than most species had soldiers. "Look at you. Supposedly the best your worlds have to offer, and I see nothing but frightened children playing dress-up in military uniforms." A recruit's mandibles clicked nervously. One of the cadets literally flickered, their form becoming translucent with fear. The humans were a relatively new addition to the Galactic Military Alliance, having joined only 50 years ago after first contact. Most Academy instructors still viewed them as curiosities, soft, short-lived mammals who somehow thought they belonged among the galaxy's true warriors. Had trained exactly 17 humans during his career. 14 had quit within the first week. 2 had suffered complete nervous breakdowns during his signature motivation exercises. 1 had made it to week 3 before requesting immediate transfer to the logistics division, preferring to count supplies for the rest of eternity rather than endure another day under instruction. "The universe is vast and filled with things that want to kill you," continued, beginning his traditional first-day speech. "Pirates who will torture you for sport before selling your organs to the highest bidder. Hive-mind species that view individual consciousness as a disease to be cured. Ancient machine intelligences that consider organic life an error to be corrected." He paused at the human girl's row. She was small even by human standards, probably barely meeting the minimum height requirements. Her brown hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and her uniform was pressed to perfection. Nothing about her suggested the kind of warrior spirit needed to survive what was coming. "What's your designation, cadet?" he demanded, all 4 eyes focusing on her like weapon targeting systems. "Sarah, sir," she replied. Her voice was steady, carrying clearly through the hall without any of the tremor that usually accompanied a first encounter with intimidation tactics. "Human," said the word like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "Tell me, cadet, what makes you think your species belongs in the same training facility as real warriors?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Other instructors had been asking variations of it since humans joined the Alliance. Humanity had no natural armor, no enhanced strength, no telepathic abilities or energy manipulation powers. They lived barely a century in most cases, a mere blink compared to the enjoyed by elder races. Their home world was an unremarkable rock orbiting an average star in a quiet sector that most galactic powers had ignored completely, until the humans started making noise. Sarah looked up at him with those dark eyes, and something in her expression made scales shift slightly toward orange, a color associated with uncertainty among his people. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" she asked. The request caught him off guard. Most recruits at this stage were too terrified to form coherent thoughts, let alone ask for permission to voice opinions. "Granted," he replied, curious despite himself. "Sir, I don't think my species belongs here because we're the strongest or the fastest or the longest lived," Sarah said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent hall. "I think we belong here because when something needs to be done, we do it. When someone needs help, we help them. When the galaxy is threatened, we show up." A few of the alien cadets exchanged glances. The human's words were simple, almost childishly direct compared to the complex military philosophies most species brought to the academy. Leaned down until his face was mere inches from hers. His breath carried the metallic scent of combat stimulants, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his earlier shouting. Pretty words, little human, but this academy isn't about noble intentions or good feelings. It's about whether you can pull a trigger when someone is trying to kill you. It's about whether you can watch your die and still complete the mission. It's about becoming a weapon that the galaxy can point at its enemies. Sarah didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Sir," she said quietly, "my grandfather fought in the Terran colonial wars. My father served during the asteroid mining conflicts. My older brother died defending a research station from pirates last year." Her voice remained steady, but something cold crept into it. "I know exactly what this academy is about." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Found himself studying the human girl's face with new attention. There was steel there, hidden beneath the soft features and regulation appearance. Steel and something else, a kind of controlled fury that reminded him of weapons held in check, ready to be unleashed at a moment's notice. "We shall see," he said finally, straightening to his full height. But even as he moved on to terrorize other cadets, part of his attention remained fixed on Sarah. The first training exercise began immediately after orientation. Combat Assessment Scenario 37, designed to separate the merely brave from the genuinely dangerous. Cadets were divided into teams of 6 and given a simple mission: infiltrate a mock enemy facility, retrieve critical intelligence, and extract without being eliminated by training weapons set to maximum stun. The facility was a maze of corridors, automated defense systems, and holographic opponents programmed with the tactical knowledge of actual enemy species. Most first-year teams failed within minutes. The lucky ones simply got stunned unconscious by the defenses. The unlucky ones triggered scenarios designed to induce psychological trauma that would surface under real combat conditions. Sarah found herself assigned to Team 7, along with 2 warriors named Click and a scout called Prism, a massive heavy weapons specialist designated Boulder, and a nervous pilot who went by Starwing. It was, noted with satisfaction, a deliberately mismatched group. There were aggressive melee fighters who preferred direct assault. The favored stealth and misdirection. Boulder wanted to smash through obstacles, while Starwing preferred to avoid conflict entirely. And the human was an unknown quantity entirely. Watched from the observation deck as Team 7 approached the facility entrance. Most teams immediately began arguing about tactics, each member pushing for approaches that favored their species' natural advantages. Team 7 was different. Sarah spoke quietly to each of her teammates, asking questions rather than giving orders. She listened to their ideas, nodded thoughtfully, and then began weaving their suggestions into something resembling a coherent plan. "Interesting," muttered Instructor, a 6-legged arachnid species known for their tactical brilliance. "The human is attempting to coordinate rather than dominate." "Waste of time," replied. "Leadership requires decisive action, not group therapy sessions." But as Team 7 began their infiltration, had to admit their approach was effective. Sarah had positioned Click and as point scouts, using their natural aggression to clear initial obstacles while Boulder provided covering fire. Prism moved independently, using their stealth capabilities to map alternate routes and disable sensors. Starwing remained with Sarah, ready to provide mobile extraction once the mission was complete. The first real test came when they encountered a squad of holographic enemies in a narrow corridor. Standard doctrine called for either overwhelming firepower or tactical retreat. Instead, Sarah had her team do something unprecedented. They coordinated. Boulder laid down suppressing fire while they flanked from 2 directions. Prism disabled the enemy's cover, leaving them exposed for Starwing to target with precision shots. Sarah herself moved through the chaos like she was born to it, directing fire and adjusting positions with hand signals that somehow transcended species barriers. The enemy squad was eliminated in under 90 seconds, without a single casualty. Lucky muttered, but his scales were beginning to show hints of green, the color of professional interest. The second test was worse. Team 7 found themselves trapped in a room filling with toxic gas while automated turrets tracked their movements. The scenario was designed to force painful choices, save some teammates or lose everyone. Sarah looked around the room for exactly 3 seconds, then began issuing rapid-fire orders. "Boulder those support beams, Prism, the ventilation shaft behind the third turret. Click, you're with me on the control panel. What happened next? Everything thought he knew about first-year cadets. Boulder didn't just attack the support beams. He calculated exactly where to strike to bring down the ceiling in a pattern that would block the turret's firing lanes without crushing his teammates. Prism didn't just find the ventilation shaft. They rewired the environmental system to reverse the gas flow, creating a clear path to the exit. They didn't just attack the control panel. They followed Sarah's directions to disable specific subsystems in a sequence that caused the room's defenses to turn on each other. The simulation ended with Team 7 standing in a room full of destroyed equipment, breathing clean air, and looking around in amazement at what they'd accomplished. In the observation deck, the other instructors had gone silent. "Run scenario analysis," ordered the computer system. Analysis complete. Team 7 completion time, 4 minutes 37 seconds. Casualty rate 0%. Resource efficiency 97%. Overall tactical rating exceptional. Instructor clicked her mandibles in what passed for applause among her species. The human coordinated 6 different biological response patterns into a coherent strategy in under 5 minutes. That's unprecedented. Studied the tactical display with growing unease. Sarah hadn't just succeeded, she'd made success look effortless. She'd taken a group of individuals from wildly different species and turned them into something that looked suspiciously like a real military unit. "Probably a fluke," he said. "Human luck is documented, they stumble into success sometimes." But even as he spoke the words, didn't believe them. There had been nothing lucky about Sarah's performance. Every decision had been deliberate, every order calculated for maximum effect. She'd assessed her teammates' capabilities, analyzed the situation, and found solutions that played to everyone's strengths while minimizing weaknesses. It was the kind of tactical thinking that usually took years to develop. The debriefing session that evening was mandatory for all first-day cadets. Most teams sat in dejected clusters, nursing their failures and wondering if they'd made a mistake joining the academy. Team 7 sat together near the front, quietly discussing what they could improve for next time. "Call them forward first." Team 7, he announced to the assembled cadets, completed Scenario 37 in under 5 minutes with 0 casualties. A murmur went through the crowd. Some cadets had never heard of anyone succeeding at all on their first attempt. "However," continued, his voice carrying the promise of incoming doom, "success in a simulation means nothing. Tomorrow you face live fire exercises. Tomorrow we discover what you're really made of." He dismissed the group and was preparing to leave when a voice stopped him. "Sir, permission to ask a question." Turned to find Sarah standing at attention, her teammates flanking her like a personal honor guard. The other cadets had cleared out, leaving the vast hall feeling empty and cold. "Speak," he commanded. "Sir, during the simulation, I noticed the tactical parameters were set to standard galactic military doctrine," Sarah said. "All enemy responses, defensive patterns, and scenario triggers followed established protocols." Scales shifted toward orange again. "Your point, cadet." "Sir, I'm wondering if real enemies follow the same protocols. In human military history, our most successful operations usually came when we did something the enemy didn't expect, something that wasn't in their tactical manuals." The question hit like a plasma blast to the chest. In over a century of military service, he'd trained thousands of cadets from dozens of species. None of them had ever questioned the fundamental assumptions underlying their training. They learned the protocols, mastered the procedures, and trusted that superior execution would carry the day. Sarah was asking if the protocols themselves were flawed. "Cadet," said slowly, "the galactic military doctrine represents 3,000 years of accumulated tactical wisdom. It has been tested in countless conflicts across the galaxy." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "But those conflicts were between species that all learned from the same tactical wisdom. What happens when you fight someone who learned something different?" The question hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Found himself thinking about the Academy's most classified files, reports from the Outer Rim where human expeditionary forces had achieved impossible victories against superior numbers. Situations where human commanders had made decisions that violated every principle of sound military doctrine and somehow succeeded anyway. Tomorrow's exercises will answer that question, Cadet, he said finally. Dismissed. As Team 7 filed out of the hall, remained behind, staring at the tactical displays still showing their simulation performance. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. 0 casualties. 97% efficiency. But more disturbing than their success was the nagging certainty that Sarah had held something back. That what he'd witnessed wasn't the human girl at her best. It was her being careful not to make her teammates look incompetent by comparison. For the first time in his long career, Commander wondered if the live-fire exercise began at dawn on Station's combat deck, a massive arena that could simulate any environment in the galaxy. Today it resembled the bombed-out ruins of Prime, complete with unstable radiation zones, collapsing structures, and very real weapons set to potentially lethal settings. Commander stood in the observation bunker, watching as 63 cadets prepared for what he privately called the separator, an exercise designed to identify which recruits had the killer instinct necessary for real warfare. The simulation was brutal in its simplicity. 2 teams, real ammunition, and a mission that could only be accomplished by eliminating the opposition. Non-lethal rounds, of course, mostly. The weapons were calibrated to cause extreme pain and temporary paralysis rather than death, but temporary was relative when dealing with different alien biologies. Every year, at least a dozen cadets ended up in medical bays for extended periods. A few suffered permanent injuries. It was considered an acceptable price for creating soldiers who could function when lives were truly at stake. Sarah stood with Team 7 at the Blue Force staging area, checking her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown during yesterday's simulation. Her teammates clustered around her, and noted with professional interest that the dynamic had shifted overnight. Where yesterday they'd been 6 individuals thrown together by chance, today they moved like a unit that had been training together for months. Team assignments, announced Lieutenant, a battle-scarred veteran whose job was to brief the exercise parameters. Blue Force consists of Team 7 and Team 12. Red Force includes Teams 3, 8, and 15. Mission objective: secure the communications array located in Grid 7-7 and hold position for 30 minutes against all opposition. Smiled grimly. It was an impossible mission by design. Blue Force had 12 cadets against Red Force's 18, and the communications array was positioned in the most defensible location on the battlefield. Standard tactical doctrine suggested the smart play was to avoid engagement entirely, focus on survival, and hope to score points for demonstrating good judgment under impossible circumstances. He was curious to see what the human girl would do. The teams deployed into the ruins with practiced efficiency. Through his monitoring equipment, could track each cadet's position, vital signs, and weapon status. Most moved exactly as expected, seeking cover, forming defensive positions, and preparing for a grinding battle of attrition. Team 7 disappeared. Sensor malfunction, inquired, checking his displays. Negative, sir, replied the technician. All systems operating normally. Team 7 appears to have scattered. Through the observation windows, could see the ruins stretching away in all directions. Broken buildings, twisted metal, and scattered debris created a maze of potential hiding spots and ambush positions. Somewhere in that chaos, Sarah was doing something that wasn't in any tactical manual. Team 3, part of Red Force, moved toward the communications array with textbook precision. The leader, a species known for their strategic thinking, had positioned his squad to take advantage of elevated positions and overlapping fields of fire. They advanced in a standard leapfrog pattern, with half the team providing cover while the other half moved. They never saw Team 7 coming. The first indication of contact was when the point scout simply vanished. One moment he was advancing cautiously through the ruins, the next moment his suit registered a stunning hit, and his position indicator went dark. The team leader ordered a defensive formation, scanning the surrounding area for threats. 2 more scouts disappeared in rapid succession. "What in the depths is happening out there?" muttered Instructor, her 6 eyes tracking multiple displays simultaneously. Activated his personal comm channel. "Control, give me tactical overview of Grid 5-5. The main screen shifted to show a bird's-eye view of the area where Team 3 was operating. According to sensors, they were alone in their sector. No other teams within 300 meters. No movement signatures. No energy discharges that would indicate weapons fire. and yet their numbers were dropping steadily. "Replay the last engagement," ordered. The screen shifted to recorded footage from 30 seconds earlier. Team 3's scout moved carefully through a gap between two collapsed walls. The area appeared completely empty. Then, in a movement so fast the replay had to be slowed to quarter speed to follow it, something emerged from what looked like solid rubble, struck the scout with a precision stun blast, and vanished again before the scout hit the ground. Human breathed, but not just the human. As he watched, the pattern became clear. Sarah wasn't operating alone. She'd somehow convinced her entire team to adopt human-style asymmetric warfare. They moved like ghosts through the ruins, appearing long enough to strike and disappearing before anyone could react. When Red Force tried to concentrate against them, they found empty positions. When they spread out to search, they became vulnerable to coordinated strikes from multiple directions. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was completely contrary to every principle of proper military engagement. Team 3 was eliminated within 15 minutes without managing to score a single hit in return. Teams 8 and 15, observing the fate of their comrades, made the sensible decision to consolidate their forces and establish a defensive perimeter around the communications array. 18 cadets formed overlapping fields of fire in a position that could hold against vastly superior numbers through simple application of superior firepower and defensive positioning. It should have worked. Sarah studied the defensive position from a concealed observation point 300 meters away. Boulder, the massive, crouched beside her, his rock-like features arranged in what passed for confusion among his people. "They are well positioned," he rumbled in a voice like grinding stone. "Direct assault would be costly." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "That's why we're not going to assault them." Prism flickered into visibility beside them, their crystalline form reflecting the artificial sunlight in prismatic patterns. "Alternative approaches are limited. The position covers all traditional infiltration routes." "Good," Sarah said, and her teammates looked at her with expressions that suggested they were beginning to question their human leader's sanity. "That means they're thinking like Academy instructors want them to think." She activated her comm unit and spoke quietly to her scattered team members. "Click, are you in position?" "Affirmative," came the reply from the warriors, who were currently hidden in the ruins 2 kilometers away from the main battle. "Starwing." "Ready," replied the pilot, whose position was even further removed from the immediate tactical situation. "Boulder, I need you to create a distraction, something loud and obvious." The warrior grinned, an expression that suggested avalanches and earthquakes. "Understood." What happened next would be analyzed in Academy tactical courses for years to come. Boulder emerged from cover at the far edge of the Red Force perimeter, carrying the heaviest weapon available to first-year cadets, a portable plasma cannon that required his enormous strength to operate effectively. He began laying down suppressing fire with the subtlety of an orbital bombardment, forcing the defenders to concentrate their attention in his direction. While 18 enemy cadets focused on the obvious threat, Sarah executed what she privately called the great flanking maneuver of human common sense. She went around them, not around the sides, where defensive positions were prepared, not over the top, where detection was inevitable. She went under the communications array, using maintenance tunnels that her teammate had mapped during their initial reconnaissance, tunnels that led directly beneath the enemy position. The Red Force team leader was a veteran cadet from the species, known for their analytical thinking and tactical expertise. He'd positioned his troops perfectly to repel any conceivable assault. He'd prepared for stealth attacks, coordinated strikes, and even suicide charges. He had not prepared for an enemy who would ignore the entire tactical situation and simply appear behind his defensive line like she'd been teleported there. Sarah emerged from a maintenance hatch 6 meters behind the Red Force position. She had perhaps 3 seconds before someone noticed her presence. In those 3 seconds, she managed to eliminate 5 enemy cadets with precision stun blasts before the remainder could react. The defensive position collapsed into chaos. In the observation bunker, the assembled instructors watched in stunned silence as Blue Force achieved a complete tactical victory in under 20 minutes. Sarah stood in the middle of what had been an impregnable defensive position, helping stunned Red Force cadets to their feet while her teammates secured the area. "Analysis," ordered the computer. Blue Force mission success. Elimination ratio 18-0. Tactical innovation index off the scale. Recommended classification, review for advanced tactical studies program. Instructor clicked her mandibles rapidly, a sign of deep agitation among her species. The human ignored established doctrine completely. She used maintenance tunnels during a combat exercise. That's effective, finished grimly. Sir, one of the technicians spoke up. We're receiving a communication request from the exercise area. Put it through. Sarah's voice came through the comm system with crystal clarity. Control, this is Blue Force Actual. Mission complete. Requesting permission to check on Red Force casualties and assist with equipment recovery. The request was so routine, so professional, that it took a moment to process what had just happened. Sarah hadn't just won an impossible battle. She'd done it without showing any signs of stress, excitement, or even mild satisfaction. She was treating the complete destruction of enemy forces like a routine training evolution. Permission granted, replied. Medical teams are standing by if needed. Understood, Control. Blue Force out. 20 minutes later, all 63 cadets stood in formation for the post-exercise debrief. Red Force looked shell-shocked, their confidence shattered by an encounter with tactics they hadn't known existed. Blue Force stood at attention, professional and alert. Sarah waited in the front rank, her expression giving nothing away. Studied her for a long moment, his scales cycling through colors that reflected his confused emotional state. As an instructor, he should have been pleased by such an overwhelming demonstration of tactical innovation. As a warrior, he was disturbed by how effortlessly the human had dismantled 18 competent enemies. As someone who'd spent a century believing he understood the nature of military excellence, he was beginning to realize he might have been wrong about everything. Cadet, he said finally, explain your tactical decision-making process. Sarah stepped forward. Sir, we identified that Red Force would establish a defensive position at the objective. Standard doctrine suggested they'd prepare for conventional assault patterns. We chose to approach the problem from a direction they wouldn't expect. You used maintenance tunnels during a combat exercise, Instructor interjected. That's not covered in any tactical manual. No, ma'am, Sarah agreed. But the mission parameters didn't prohibit it. Sometimes the best solution isn't in the manual. Felt his scales shifting toward deep orange, a color his people associated with dangerous thoughts. And what if the tunnels had been defended? What if your intelligence had been wrong? What if the enemy had prepared for unconventional approaches? Sarah looked directly at him with those dark human eyes, and for a moment felt like he was staring into the depths of something vast and predatory. Sir, she said quietly, then we would have done something else. The simple statement hit the observation deck like a physical blow. Not we would have retreated, or we would have followed backup protocols, or any of the responses that proper military training suggested. Sarah had just stated, as calmly as discussing the weather, that her team would have continued adapting until they found a solution. No matter what the enemy did, no matter what obstacles appeared, no matter what the cost. It was the most terrifying thing had ever heard a first-year cadet say. The exercise is concluded, he announced, his voice carrying more authority than usual to mask his own uncertainty. Review your performance logs and prepare for tomorrow's evolution. Dismissed. As the cadets filed out, Sarah lingered for a moment. Sir, permission to ask a question. Nodded, not trusting his voice. Sir, when do we start training against enemies who studied our tactics? When do we learn to fight people who know how we think? The question struck like lightning. In all his years of instruction, he'd focused on teaching cadets to execute established tactical doctrine with maximum efficiency. He'd never considered what happened when that doctrine encountered someone who'd learned to think around it, through it, and beyond it. That's advanced coursework, cadet, years of study. Sarah smiled, the first genuine expression of emotion he'd seen from her since arrival. Sir, respectfully, I think it might be more urgent than that. If humans can learn to fight like this in a few decades, what happens when someone else learns to fight like us? She saluted and walked out, leaving alone with the most disturbing thought of his career. For the first time in 3 centuries, the Galactic Military Academy had encountered a cadet who wasn't trying to master the curriculum. The emergency briefing came at 300 hours, 7 days after Sarah's tactical demolition of the live fire exercise. Commander found himself standing in the Academy's highest security briefing room alongside Admiral, the station's commanding officer, and a collection of senior staff that included representatives from Galactic Intelligence and the Strategic Planning Division. The reason for the meeting was displayed on the main screen, a star map showing the outer rim territories where something unprecedented was happening. Human expeditionary forces, operating in small independent units, had achieved 17 consecutive victories against superior naval forces. Each battle showed the same pattern, humans using tactics that violated established naval doctrine to achieve impossible results. "They are requesting formal tactical consultations," Admiral announced, his massive draconian form radiating the kind of barely controlled violence that made his species natural warriors. "They want to understand how humans are consistently defeating forces twice their size with inferior technology." Intelligence Director, whose species existed as pure energy contained within crystalline matrices, pulsed with concerned frequencies. "Analysis of human tactical patterns suggests they're not following any recognizable strategic doctrine. Their battle plans appear to be improvised." "Impossible," rumbled General, the Academy's senior tactical instructor. "No force can achieve consistent victories through improvisation. There must be an underlying strategic framework we're not detecting." Commander found himself thinking about a small human girl who'd asked when they would train against enemies who'd studied their tactics. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "the improvisation is the framework." The room fell silent, all eyes focused on the instructor whose reputation for breaking cadets was matched only by his tactical expertise. "Explain," Admiral ordered. Activated his personal display, showing tactical recordings from the previous week's exercises. "I've been observing a human cadet whose performance defies conventional analysis. She doesn't execute tactics, she creates them. Every engagement, she identifies what her opponents expect and then does something different." "One cadet," Director pulsed dismissively, "hardly representative of human military doctrine." "Perhaps not," agreed. "But what if human military doctrine isn't about following predetermined patterns? What if it's about teaching individuals to think tactically in real time, adapting to circumstances as they develop?" General's rock-like features arranged themselves in skeptical patterns. "Tactical improvisation requires years of training and experience. These are new recruits." "Human new recruits," corrected, "who have been selected for a program designed specifically to challenge conventional thinking." Admiral studied the tactical displays with the focused intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "You believe this cadet represents broader human tactical philosophy?" "I believe this cadet represents something we haven't encountered before," said carefully. "And I believe we need to understand it before someone else does." The decision was made with characteristic galactic military efficiency. Sarah and Team 7 would be transferred to accelerated advanced training, with full monitoring and analysis of their tactical development. If human improvisation could be understood, it could be incorporated into standard academy curriculum. If it couldn't be understood, at least it could be identified and countered. Was assigned as primary instructor and observer, with orders to push the human team to their absolute limits and document everything they did. It was, he reflected as he walked toward Advanced Training Facility 3, possibly the most dangerous assignment of his career. Sarah received the news of her team's advancement with the same calm professionalism she'd shown since arrival. Advanced training meant harder challenges, more dangerous scenarios, and the kind of pressure that broke many senior cadets. It also meant access to restricted tactical libraries, experimental weapon systems, and simulation environments that could replicate any battle conditions in recorded galactic history. "Congratulations," said as Team 7 assembled in their new facility. "You've been selected for the Advanced Tactical Development Program. This means you'll be facing challenges designed for fourth-year cadets while still in your first month of training." Click and the warriors clicked their mandibles in what passed for excitement among their species. Boulder simply grinned, anticipating bigger weapons and more impressive destruction. Prism flickered between visible and translucent, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns that suggested pleased anticipation. Starwing looked terrified, which was a reasonable response to being selected for training that had a documented fatality rate. Sarah just nodded. What's the first scenario, sir? Activated the facility's main display, showing a tactical problem that had never been successfully resolved in over a century of attempts. The Battle of Nine. Historical recreation with full environmental simulation. Your mission is to achieve something that 300 senior cadets have failed to accomplish. Find a way to evacuate civilian populations from a planet under orbital bombardment by a vastly superior enemy fleet. The scenario was brutal in its simplicity. Nine had been a mining colony with no military defenses when the Empire had arrived with a battle fleet designed to sterilize the planet's surface. The evacuation had been a disaster. Too few ships, too little time, and an enemy that showed no mercy for civilian targets. Every previous attempt to solve the scenario had ended the same way. Partial evacuation at best, with massive civilian casualties and the eventual destruction of most rescue vessels. The scenario was used to teach cadets about impossible choices and acceptable losses. Sometimes saving some people was the best you could hope for. Parameters, Sarah said, studying the tactical display. 2 hours until orbital bombardment begins, replied. Civilian population, 200,000. Available evacuation ships, sufficient capacity for 50,000. Enemy fleet, 12 heavy cruisers with full orbital superiority. Your force, 1 patrol squadron with limited defensive capabilities. Sarah stared at the display for exactly 30 seconds. Then she turned to her teammates and began issuing orders with the kind of calm precision that was beginning to associate with humans preparing to do something impossible. Prism, I need complete sensor mapping of the enemy fleet dispositions. Focus on command vessels and communication patterns. Starwing, plot evacuation routes that maximize capacity efficiency. Forget about safety margins for now. Boulder, what's the heaviest weapon system available to our patrol ships? Mark VII plasma torpedoes, Boulder rumbled, consulting his tactical database. Effective against light cruiser armor, insufficient to penetrate heavy cruiser defenses. Perfect, Sarah said, which made no sense to anyone listening. Click, I need you to analyze tactical doctrine. How do they respond to direct assault on their command structure? The warriors exchanged glances. Standard response, concentrate fire on attacking units while maintaining orbital bombardment schedule, replied. Good, Sarah said. And how long do they maintain that response pattern when under attack? Until attacking units are eliminated or withdraw beyond effective range, Click answered. Sarah smiled and felt his scales shift toward orange again. There was something predatory about that smile, something that suggested the human girl had just identified a weakness that no one else had seen. Sir, she said, turning to, are there any restrictions on tactical innovation during this scenario? None, replied, though he was beginning to suspect he should have imposed some. Understood, beginning implementation. What Sarah did next would be analyzed by galactic military strategists for decades. Instead of attempting to maximize evacuation efficiency or minimize military losses, she did something that had never been attempted in over a century of tactical simulations. She convinced the enemy to help her. It began with her patrol squadron attacking the command vessel with every weapon they possessed. The assault was doomed to failure. Patrol ships couldn't penetrate heavy cruiser armor, but it forced the enemy fleet to respond according to their tactical doctrine. All 12 heavy cruisers turned their attention to eliminating the attacking force, temporarily suspending orbital bombardment operations. That gave her exactly 14 minutes of bombardment-free time. But instead of using those minutes for evacuation, Sarah did something else. She had Prism use the patrol ship's communication systems to broadcast a message across every frequency the fleet was monitoring. Attention Command. This is Colonial Defense Coordinator. I'm prepared to surrender all military assets and civilian populations in exchange for guaranteed safe passage for essential personnel. The message was broadcast in perfect language, using formal diplomatic protocols that suggested official authorization. It was also, from beginning to end, a complete fabrication. The human is attempting to negotiate, General asked from the observation deck. Doctrine prohibits negotiation during sterilization operations. I don't think she's negotiating, replied, watching Sarah's team implement increasingly complex maneuvers while maintaining the communication channel. I think she's buying time. What became clear over the next hour was that Sarah wasn't trying to surrender. She was using protocols against them. Every time the enemy fleet prepared to resume bombardment, her ships would request clarification on surrender terms. When they demanded unconditional surrender, she would ask for specifications on essential personnel exemptions. When they clarified exemptions, she would request additional time to compile complete personnel rosters. Each exchange bought her team precious minutes, while maintaining the fiction that formal surrender negotiations were in progress. Meanwhile, Team 7 was implementing the most audacious evacuation plan in military history. Instead of using the available ships to ferry civilians off-planet, they were using them to construct what could only be described as an improvised mass driver, an electromagnetic launch system that could literally shoot evacuation pods into space at velocities sufficient to reach the system's outer planets. "That's impossible," Director pulsed from the observation deck. "The power requirements alone would drain every ship's reactor." "Not if you wire them in parallel," Sarah's voice came through the comm system as she coordinated the construction effort. "Boulder, I need you to manually connect those power couplers. Starwing, recalibrate the launch trajectory for minimal enemy detection. Click. Those mining charges can be shaped into propulsion systems if we configure them properly." What she was describing was insane. Mining equipment and patrol ship reactors weren't designed to create electromagnetic launch systems. The power levels involved could cause catastrophic explosions. The trajectory calculations alone should have required complex computer modeling. But it was working. The first evacuation pods launched 47 minutes into the scenario, carrying 500 civilians each toward predetermined recovery points in the outer system. The launch system had been constructed from mining equipment, patrol ship components, and what appeared to be industrial-grade improvisation. By the 90-minute mark, Team 7 had evacuated 60,000 civilians using a transportation method that violated multiple laws of physics and several safety regulations, but which definitely worked. The fleet, meanwhile, had become increasingly frustrated with surrender negotiations that seemed to involve endless bureaucratic complications. Their tactical doctrine didn't include provisions for dealing with an enemy who insisted on discussing the fine points of prisoner of war status, while simultaneously engaging in suspicious industrial activity. When they finally realized what was actually happening, it was too late. The evacuation was complete, the improvised launch system had been dismantled, and Sarah's patrol squadron was performing what could only be described as a strategic withdrawal at maximum possible speed. "Scenario complete," the computer announced. "Civilian evacuation rate 97%, military casualties minimal, tactical innovation index unprecedented." In the observation deck, the assembled senior officers sat in stunned silence. "She used their own protocols against them," Admiral said finally. "She convinced them to postpone bombardment by pretending to surrender while building an evacuation system that shouldn't exist." "The human lied to the enemy," General stated with something that might have been admiration in his gravelly voice. "More than that," said quietly. "She identified that doctrine prioritizes formal protocols over tactical flexibility. She exploited their bureaucratic thinking while implementing solutions that no one has ever attempted before." Director pulsed rapid calculations through her crystalline form. "Analysis suggests this approach could be replicated across multiple engagement types. The implications for standard tactical doctrine are significant." Admiral rose to his full impressive height, his scaled features arranged in patterns that suggested he was reaching important decisions. "Commander, I want comprehensive analysis of human tactical methodology. If they've developed an approach that can consistently achieve impossible victories, we need to understand it." "Sir," replied, "I'm not sure human tactical methodology can be understood in traditional terms. Every engagement they've attempted has involved innovation that transcends established doctrine." "Then we need to understand innovation itself," the Admiral concluded. "Whatever these humans are doing, it's changing the nature of warfare. We either learn to do it ourselves or we learn to defend against it." As the senior staff filed out to begin what would be the most comprehensive tactical analysis in galactic military history, remained behind, studying the scenario recordings. Somewhere in those displays was the key to understanding why humans consistently achieved impossible results. But as he watched Sarah coordinate her team's escape with the same calm pro-3 weeks after the 9 scenario, the first reports began arriving from the Outer Rim territories. Naval forces, having studied human tactical patterns for months, had developed countermeasures. They'd learned to expect the unexpected, prepare for unconventional approaches, and maintain tactical flexibility in the face of human improvisation. It hadn't helped. The latest engagement at Station showed human forces achieving victory using tactics that were simultaneously completely predictable and utterly impossible to counter. A single human cruiser had challenged an entire battle fleet to formal single combat, then proceeded to defeat each enemy vessel one at a time, while the rest of the fleet waited their turn according to the ancient Code of War. The Code of War hadn't been invoked in actual combat for over 800 years. No one had expected a species barely 50 years old to even know it existed, much less use it as a tactical weapon. Commanders studied the battle reports with growing unease, while Sarah and Team 7 prepared for their next training evolution. The pattern was becoming clear. Human tactical success wasn't based on superior innovation or unpredictability. It was based on something far more dangerous: the ability to think outside the conceptual frameworks that defined warfare for every other species in the galaxy. "Sir," Sarah said, reviewing the mission parameters on the main display, "this scenario appears to be a straight combat simulation. No evacuation objectives, no time constraints, no civilian considerations, just elimination of enemy forces." She sounded almost disappointed. The scenario was indeed straightforward. Team 7 would face Team Alpha from the Advanced Combat School, 6 fourth-year cadets with 3 years of intensive training and combat experience. The engagement would take place in a sealed arena with equal starting positions and identical equipment. It was designed to test pure tactical skill without environmental complications or special circumstances. "Sometimes," replied, "warfare is about fundamental combat effectiveness. Not every battle can be won through clever maneuvering." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Sir, what are the victory conditions?" "Elimination of all enemy forces or capture of the central objective point. Standard engagement rules apply." "And if we choose not to engage at all?" The question caught off guard. "The scenario requires engagement, cadet. Avoiding combat would result in mission failure." "Understood, sir, but the parameters only specify that we must achieve victory conditions, correct? Not how we achieve them." Felt his scales shifting toward orange again. After weeks of observation, he'd learned that when Sarah asked clarifying questions about mission parameters, she was usually about to do something that would require extensive post-action analysis. "Correct," he answered carefully. "Thank you, sir. Request permission to begin the evolution." The arena was a perfect cube, 50 meters on each side, constructed from materials that could withstand heavy weapons fire. Team Alpha had positioned themselves in a classic defensive formation at the center of the space, controlling the objective point while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Their leader was a combat specialist whose tactical scores ranked in the top 5% of his class. Team 7 entered from the opposite side of the arena and immediately did something unprecedented. They sat down. "Sensor malfunction?" asked Instructor, Team Alpha's advisor. "Negative," replied, checking his instruments. "Team 7 appears to be waiting." For the next 20 minutes, nothing happened. Team Alpha maintained their defensive positions while Team 7 remained motionless near the arena entrance. No shots were fired. No movements were made. Both teams simply waited in perfect silence. "Time remaining 40 minutes, the computer announced. Sarah activated her comm unit. "This is Sarah. Are you monitoring this frequency?" "I am," came the reply from the combat specialist. "What are you proposing, human?" "A question, actually. What happens if this exercise ends without either team achieving victory conditions?" There was a pause while consulted his tactical manual. "Mission failure for both units. Negative marks on performance reviews. Possible academic probation." "Right," Sarah agreed. "So we both lose if nobody wins, but what if we change the parameters?" "Explain." What Sarah proposed next would become known in Academy history as the doctrine, the first recorded instance of opposing forces cooperating to redefine victory conditions during active combat. The objective point needs to be captured, not necessarily held exclusively. Sarah explained. Mission parameters require elimination of enemy forces or control of the objective, but they don't specify that enemy forces can't be eliminated through means other than combat. Continue. What if we both capture the objective simultaneously? What if victory is achieved through cooperation rather than conflict? Was quiet for a long moment. You're proposing that we work together to satisfy victory conditions for both teams. I'm proposing that we think about what victory actually means, Sarah replied. Combat simulation assumes that conflict is the only way to achieve objectives, but most real military operations involve multiple parties working toward compatible goals. In the observation deck, the assembled instructors watched in fascination as the two team leaders continued their negotiation. Neither side was moving from their positions, but the conversation was rapidly becoming more complex than anything previously recorded in Academy training scenarios. This is unprecedented, Admiral observed. They're attempting to resolve military conflict through diplomacy during active combat training. The scenario parameters don't allow for diplomatic solutions, General pointed out. Victory conditions are clearly defined. Are they? Asked quietly. The scenario requires elimination of enemy forces or capture of objectives. It doesn't specify that elimination must be hostile or that objectives can't be shared. As if responding to his observation, both teams began moving toward the center of the arena. But instead of approaching in combat formation, they advanced in what could only be described as parade formation, weapons lowered, organized ranks, and completely non-threatening postures. What are they doing? Director pulsed nervously. I think, said slowly, they're redefining warfare. Team Alpha and Team 7 met at the objective point and proceeded to implement the most unusual victory condition in Academy history. Rather than fighting for control, they established joint occupation. Rather than eliminating each other, they declared their opponents eliminated through voluntary withdrawal from hostilities. The computer, faced with a situation that didn't exist in its programmed parameters, declared the exercise completed with mutual victory for both teams. This is impossible, General rumbled. Military training cannot allow for shared victories. Combat requires winners and losers. Does it? Sarah asked from the arena floor. Sir, in real combat, the best victory is often the one where both sides achieve their essential objectives without unnecessary casualties. Most conflicts could be resolved through negotiation if both parties were willing to redefine success. Admiral leaned forward in his chair, his massive form radiating the kind of focused attention that preceded important decisions. Cadet, are you suggesting that human military doctrine prioritizes diplomatic solutions over combat effectiveness? No, sir, Sarah replied. I'm suggesting that human military doctrine recognizes combat as one tool among many for achieving strategic objectives. Sometimes the best tactical solution doesn't involve fighting at all. The statement hung in the air like an unexpected weapon discharge. For 3 centuries, the Galactic Military Academy had trained officers to win through superior firepower, tactical innovation, and strategic thinking. The idea that victory might be achieved through redefining conflict itself was completely alien to established military philosophy. Explain human military history to support this position, Instructor demanded. Sarah straightened to attention, her expression shifting to something that reminded of historical lectures he'd attended as a young officer. Sir, some of humanity's greatest military victories have been achieved without firing a shot. The Cold War between our major powers was won through economic and technological competition rather than direct conflict. The Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved through negotiation that allowed both sides to claim victory while avoiding nuclear war. The Berlin airlift defeated enemy strategy through persistence and logistics rather than violence. She paused, looking directly at Admiral. Human military philosophy recognizes that the highest form of tactical skill is achieving victory without combat, not because we're afraid to fight, but because we understand that unnecessary fighting is inefficient. The observation deck fell silent. In a few sentences, Sarah had summarized an approach to warfare that no one in the galaxy had previously articulated. It wasn't pacifism. Humans had proven their willingness to fight when necessary. It was something more sophisticated, the recognition that military force was most effective when it didn't have to be used. Cadet, Admiral said finally. "You've just described a tactical philosophy that could revolutionize galactic military doctrine. Do you understand the implications of what you're suggesting?" "Sir, I believe I'm describing tactical philosophy that humans have been using for decades. The implications are that most conflicts in the galaxy could probably be resolved more efficiently through cooperation than conquest." Director pulsed rapid calculations through her crystalline matrix. "Analysis suggests significant resource efficiency improvements if combat could be systematically avoided through pre-engagement negotiation protocols." "It's not about avoiding combat," Sarah said. "It's about understanding that the goal of military action is achieving strategic objectives. Combat is just one method for reaching those objectives. Often it's not the most efficient method." General's rock-like features arranged themselves in patterns that suggested deep thought. "Human forces in the Outer Rim have been achieving impossible victories against superior numbers. Are you suggesting those victories were achieved through negotiation rather than combat?" "Sir, I'm suggesting those victories were achieved through thinking about objectives differently than their opponents did. Sometimes that meant fighting in unexpected ways. Sometimes it meant not fighting at all. Sometimes it meant convincing enemies that their objectives could be achieved more easily through cooperation than conflict." Found himself studying the tactical displays with new understanding. Every human victory he'd analyzed had involved some form of taking established parameters and finding solutions that existed outside conventional thinking. It wasn't just tactical innovation, it was conceptual revolution. "The implications are staggering," Admiral said quietly. "If human military philosophy can be systematized and taught, we could be looking at the end of traditional warfare as we understand it. Or," General pointed out grimly, "we could be looking at the beginning of conflicts with enemies who learn to think like humans. What happens when someone uses these techniques against us?" The question struck the observation deck like a physical blow. If humans could consistently achieve impossible victories through conceptual innovation, what happened when other species learned to think conceptually? What happened when the galaxy's traditional military powers found themselves facing enemies who could redefine the nature of conflict itself? Sarah looked up at the observation windows with those dark human eyes, and for a moment had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see directly into their thoughts. "Sir," she said quietly, "that's why we're here, to make sure everyone learns to think like humans before someone decides to use human thinking against us." The statement carried implications that would keep galactic military strategists awake for months. But as watched Sarah coordinate her team's exit from the arena with the same calm professionalism she'd shown throughout their unprecedented victory, he began to understand something that chilled him to the bone. The human girl wasn't trying to win individual battles or training scenarios. The emergency session was called at Admiral's personal request, 6 months after Sarah's arrival at the Academy. Representatives from every major military power in the galaxy had gathered on station for what was officially designated as a Tactical Innovation Conference, but which everyone understood to be something far more significant. Commander stood before the assembled military leadership of known space, his scales permanently locked in the orange coloration that indicated profound uncertainty. Behind him, holographic displays showed tactical analyses, battle recordings, and statistical projections that painted a picture of warfare in fundamental transition. "The data is conclusive," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast conference hall. "Human tactical methodology represents a paradigm shift comparable to the introduction of energy weapons. Within 6 months, we've documented 17 distinct innovations that have no precedent in recorded military history." Fleet Admiral Horn of the Empire leaned forward, his cybernetic implants gleaming under the conference lights. "Commander, are you suggesting that a species barely 50 years into galactic civilization has developed tactics superior to military traditions dating back?" "I'm suggesting," replied carefully, "that humans approach tactical problems from fundamentally different conceptual frameworks. They don't seek to perfect existing methods, they question the assumptions underlying those methods." He activated the first display, showing battle footage from the Outer Rim conflicts. Traditional analysis focuses on execution, how well forces implement established tactics. Human analysis focuses on selection, choosing which tactics to implement based on circumstance rather than doctrine. General Aura of the Collective, whose species had dominated galactic warfare for 3 centuries through superior strategic thinking, spoke with the authority of someone who had never encountered defeat. Every species believes their tactical approach is innovative. What makes human methods demonstrably superior? Activated a tactical comparison display. Results. Human expeditionary forces have achieved 43 consecutive victories against numerically and technologically superior opponents. Statistical analysis indicates this is impossible under normal tactical frameworks. Impossible or unprecedented? Asked Director of the Strategic Analysis Institute. Perhaps human success reflects natural tactical ability rather than systematic methodology. That's what we initially believed, admitted, until we analyzed the progression patterns. The next display showed tactical evolution charts that had stunned every military analyst who'd seen them. Human tactical innovation wasn't random or intuitive. It followed clear developmental patterns that could be mapped, predicted, and potentially replicated. Human military education emphasizes what they call thinking outside the box, explained. Rather than mastering predetermined tactical solutions, human officers learn to generate novel solutions for unprecedented problems. They're trained to innovate, not just execute. Supreme Commander Anis of the Draconic War clans, whose species had remained undefeated in direct combat for over 1,000 years, let out a rumble that shook the conference hall. You're describing tactical chaos. Military effectiveness requires discipline, not innovation. Does it? The voice came from the back of the hall, where a small figure in cadet uniform had been sitting in the observer section. Every head turned to stare at Sarah, who stood with the calm poise that had become her trademark. She should have been intimidated by the assembled military might of the galaxy. Instead, she looked like someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment. Explain yourself, Admiral commanded, though his voice carried more curiosity than anger. Sarah stepped forward, moving through the hall with the same steady confidence she'd shown in every situation since her arrival. Sir, with respect to Supreme Commander Anis, I think tactical effectiveness requires discipline in service of adaptability, not conformity in service of tradition. You dare question draconic military philosophy? Anis roared, his massive form radiating the kind of barely controlled violence that made entire star systems surrender without resistance. Sarah looked directly at him without flinching. Sir, I question any philosophy that prioritizes method over results. Draconic forces are undefeated in traditional combat, but how many conflicts have you won without fighting at all? The question hit the conference like a quantum torpedo. Draconic military culture was built around the concept of honorable combat, the idea that victory achieved through fighting was inherently superior to victory achieved through any other means. Combat avoidance is not victory, Anis stated with the absolute certainty of someone who had never considered alternative definitions. Isn't it? Sarah asked. Sir, if your objective is to secure a star system, and that system surrenders without resistance because your reputation preceded you, haven't you achieved your goal more efficiently than if you'd been forced to fight a planetary siege? Director's analytical algorithms nearly overloaded as they processed the implications. The human is suggesting that reputation itself can be a tactical weapon. More than that, Sarah said, turning to address the full assembly. I'm suggesting that every tool you use to prepare for warfare, logistics, intelligence, diplomacy, economic pressure, technological demonstration, can be used to achieve warfare's objectives without requiring actual conflict. Fleet Admiral Horn's cybernetic systems cycled through rapid calculations. You're describing the militarization of non-military assets. No, sir, Sarah replied. I'm describing the recognition that military objectives are usually strategic objectives, and strategy involves every resource available to a civilization. Combat is just one resource among many. General Ara leaned back in her chair, her features arranged in patterns that indicated deep analysis. This approach would require coordination between military and civilian sectors on an unprecedented scale. Yes, ma'am, Sarah agreed. Human military doctrine assumes that civilian leadership, economic systems, technological development, and diplomatic efforts are all components of national defense. We don't separate military and civilian thinking, we integrate them. The conference hall buzzed with translation algorithms working overtime as representatives tried to process concepts that didn't exist in their military vocabularies. The idea that civilian and military capabilities could be systematically integrated was beyond most species' tactical frameworks. Supreme Commander Anis rose to his full imposing height, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 successful battles. Human philosophy may be intellectually interesting, but it remains unproven against serious opposition. Draconic forces have never been defeated because we understand that true warfare requires warriors, not philosophers. Sarah smiled, the same expression that had been making nervous for months. "Sir, would you be interested in a demonstration?" The challenge hung in the air like an activated weapons system. A first-year human cadet had just offered to demonstrate military effectiveness against the Supreme Commander of Forces that had remained undefeated for a millennium. "Explain the terms," Admiral said quickly, before Anis could respond with something that would require medical intervention. "Standard Academy Tactical Simulation," Sarah proposed. "Supreme Commander Anis commanding draconic-style forces against a human-style approach. Equal numbers, equal technology, neutral battlefield. Victory conditions to be agreed upon by both participants." Anis laughed, a sound like controlled explosions. "Child, I have commanded star fleets in battles that shaped galactic history. You have completed academy training scenarios." "Yes, sir," Sarah agreed, "which is why this would be instructive for everyone involved." The formal challenge was accepted within an hour. The Academy's most advanced simulation facility was configured for what was being privately called the Battle of Concepts' traditional draconic military excellence against human tactical innovation, with the military leadership of the galaxy as observers. Supreme Commander Anis commanded forces that represented 3,000 years of refined military tradition. His battle plan was a masterpiece of classical tactics, coordinated fleet movements, overwhelming firepower, and the kind of disciplined execution that had conquered half the galaxy. Sarah commanded forces that followed no established doctrine and whose battle plan appeared to be completely improvised. The engagement began with Anis executing a textbook fleet advancement. His forces moved in perfect formation, maintaining optimal firing solutions while advancing to engagement range. Every movement was precisely calculated, every position optimal for maximum combat effectiveness. Sarah's forces scattered. Not in retreat, in what could only be described as controlled dispersion. Her ships spread across the battlefield in patterns that seemed random but which somehow maintained communication and coordination links. When draconic forces moved to engage the largest concentration, they found empty space. When they redirected toward other targets, those targets had already moved. "The human is avoiding engagement," General Ara observed. "Classic delaying tactics." "No," said quietly, studying the tactical displays with growing understanding. "She's preparing the battlefield." What became apparent over the next hour was that Sarah wasn't trying to fight draconic forces. She was trying to change the nature of the combat itself. Her scattered ships weren't retreating. They were positioning sensor platforms, communication relays, and mobile supply bases that effectively turned the entire battlefield into a single integrated weapon system. When Anis finally forced engagement, he found himself fighting not just enemy ships but the battlefield itself. His perfectly coordinated fleet movements were detected and countered before they could be implemented. His communication protocols were being monitored and jammed. His supply lines were being harassed by forces that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The draconic Supreme Commander found himself fighting a war where traditional concepts of battle lines, engagement ranges, and tactical positions had no meaning. "This is not warfare," he announced over the communication system. "This is chaos." "Sir," Sarah replied from somewhere in the distributed network that her forces had become, "this is adaptation. Your forces are designed to win battles. Mine are designed to achieve objectives." The difference became clear in the simulation's final phase. Anis had superior firepower, better coordination, and 3 of tactical wisdom. But Sarah had turned the battlefield into an environment where firepower couldn't be concentrated. Coordination was compromised by distributed threats, and tactical wisdom was irrelevant because the engagement had evolved beyond traditional parameters. When the simulation ended, Draconic forces controlled the original battlefield. But human forces controlled everything around it, including all the supply routes, communication networks, and strategic positions that made the original battlefield meaningless. The computer declared the result victory, human forces, strategic objectives achieved. Supreme Commander Anis sat in stunned silence. Around the observation deck, the assembled military leadership of the galaxy tried to process what they'd witnessed, the complete neutralization of traditional military superiority through techniques that barely qualified as warfare. How? Anis asked finally. Sarah materialized on the simulation deck, her holographic form as calm and professional as always. Sir, you fought to win a battle. I worked to make the battle irrelevant. But the tactical principles, the strategic doctrine, the proven methods. Anis's voice trailed off as he struggled to reconcile lifelong certainties with undeniable results. Still valid, Sarah said gently, but only within traditional frameworks. When someone changes the framework, traditional methods become limiting factors rather than advantages. Admiral stood slowly, his massive draconic form radiating the kind of focused intensity that preceded historic decisions. Cadet, you've just demonstrated that human tactical methodology can neutralize any traditional military approach. What are the implications for galactic security? Sarah looked around the assembled military leadership, representatives of species that had dominated galactic warfare now forced to confront the possibility that everything they thought they knew about military effectiveness was obsolete. Sir, she said quietly, the implication is that warfare as we've known it is ending. The choice now is whether we adapt together or compete separately. And if we choose competition? Fleet Admiral Horn asked. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something cold crept into her voice. Sir, then you'll discover what happens when human tactical innovation is applied with hostile intent instead of cooperative goals. The conference hall fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had just demonstrated the ability to neutralize traditional military power through conceptual innovation. If humans chose to use those capabilities against the galaxy instead of for it. What do you propose? Admiral asked. Integration, Sarah replied. Human tactical methodology combined with existing military traditions. Innovation in service of cooperation rather than conquest. A new kind of military academy that teaches adaptability alongside effectiveness. You're describing the complete restructuring of galactic military doctrine, Director observed. Yes, ma'am, Sarah agreed. Because the alternative is watching traditional military doctrine become extinct while everyone scrambles to develop human-style capabilities independently. Supreme Commander Anis looked around the conference hall, seeing in the faces of his peers the same realization that was dawning on him. Traditional warfare hadn't been defeated, it had been transcended. The Draconic War clans, he said slowly, formally request inclusion in this integration program. One by one, every major military power in the galaxy made the same request. And in that moment, Commander realized that Sarah had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. Not through conquest or diplomacy or technological superiority, but through the simple demonstration that there were better ways to think about the problems that had divided civilizations The human girl who had walked into his training hall 6 months earlier hadn't just mastered the curriculum. She had changed the galaxy, was trying to change the fundamental nature of how the galaxy thought about warfare itself. And she was succeeding. She'd shown throughout the impossible evacuation. He began to suspect the answer wasn't in the displays at all. It was in the mind of a small human girl who approached every problem like it was just another puzzle to be solved. She was trying to transcend it. And she was succeeding. He was about to discover what it really meant when humans decided to show the galaxy what they could do. The thought should have excited him. Instead, it made his scales shift to deep purple and stay there for the rest of the night.